I'm ready.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking time to join Steve and I today for today's presentation on the what inflation means for your company's operating expenses. So just right quickly off the bat, my name is Marty Kirshner. I'm an audit partner at Gray and head of our energy business practice group. And I'm very fortunate today to be joined by my friend Steve Abbate, the managing director of CT & Associates. I already assume that many of you are familiar with the services we provide, and so we're not going to go into that, but it's kind of funny because about a month ago, I was talking with my partner, Joe Ciccarello. We were just having a casual conversation on, the price spike and margins and everyone freaking out. And then, simultaneously we were dealing with inflation and, cost of labor and, talking about our own employees and all the other expenses that we incur and how they've gone up and how we can pass these things along, which is easier said than done. And we kind of said, well, I'm sure Steve is probably dealing with the same thing on the M&A side with a lot of his businesses and valuation work that he's doing and, obviously the transactional work. So we actually were going to reach out to him to do a presentation on this and I'm going to call him. But next thing I know, later that day, I get a phone call from Steve saying, hey, Marty, seen a lot of stuff going on here with inflation. I'm thinking it might be a good opportunity for us to do a presentation. So, it's kind of funny as top business advisors in the industry, it led us to believe that it's obviously a very relevant hot topic button that we should discuss. Obviously, Steve and I had done webinars in the past on the price spike, and it was really more focused around managing cash flow. This presentation is really more of the impact of inflation, and it's really the culmination of the profitability of your company's business being under attack at all different angles. Obviously, the price spike really hurt margins. Now inflation's hurting your operating expenses. So our goal today is to walk you through the impacts that it's having on your business and really how to combat it, and so that you can maintain your consistent levels of profitability that you've had and also maintain the value in the business that you've helped build over the course of the past several years. So, today's discussion, we're going to go into how inflation is going to impact your profitability, both in the short term and the long term. Steve and I are going to walk through some real examples of what the numbers are going to look like. And we're actually taking a very visual approach. So I know some of you might prefer seeing our faces, but we're going to probably spend a majority of the time looking at the visual exhibits that we've put on so that you can really see what's going on here. We'll walk you through how inflation is going to impact the value of your company, give you some tips and tricks that you can take to reduce operating expenses. I will spend a little bit of time on the back end touching on cash flow, but that's really not the focus of today's presentation, but we will get into how you can improve your credit and collections and working capital, because similar to the price spike webinars where we were talking about managing cash flow, it's just as important in an inflationary environment to make sure that cash is king as well. So we will talk a little bit about on it because we'd be remiss not to, as that's one of the tools that you need to be able to get through the stormy economic conditions that we're currently encountering, because there's really no definitive timeline of when we're going to come out the other side of this. There's still a lot of stuff going on overseas with Ukraine and Russia, which is really the catalyst for this presentation, because it has caused such a domino effect on the industry. So this is really timely information, and we hope you find some value in some of the stuff we're showing you today. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Steve.
Great. Thanks, Marty. These are just some numbers I pulled out of the Wall Street Journal. 8.5% inflation through the end of March. And then you have what they call core price index at 6.5%. We've seen energy spikes before where we've had, prices up substantially, but not coupled with overall inflation in the marketplace. So we want to address that today, in addition to the cost of fuel. Marty, you want to move slide there? So I did a couple of samples. I always like to show by examples. I tend to go to the spreadsheet side of it. So this is a company, 2 million gallons heating oil, 2 million gallons of propane. I didn't do any weather adjustments. I didn't do any attrition. I didn't do any growth. It's just flat, just to give you an idea. I also didn't put in any service or other revenues, which I suggest that you do. I want to give you an example so you can go back to your businesses, take a look at your income statements, and maybe do this type of analysis on your own business. So I did take cost of product and, from some clients we had to get in the ballpark, 92 cents on propane, $1.45 on oil for 2020. Then moved up in 2021 where we started to see these increases. So it's kind of like a hybrid year. And 2022, I think we're starting to see the full impact. So I talked to some marketers and they said, I said, what are you doing to offset this? And well, we've had to increase our margins. So I put just in the first example, 7-cent increase per gallon on propane, 5 cents on heating oil, just to kind of see where this would impact on a company with these numbers. Marty? Okay, so revenue, as you can see, the total revenues just keeps increasing throughout this projection. The cost of goods sold has also gone up, and again, we left the you'll see it fairly stable on both the heating oil and the propane, and then the gross profits that we have. They took a dip in 2021. We saw most companies took a dip in 2021, weather adjusted. And then people are starting to get it back now in 2022. And at 7 cents increase in your margin, you are going to pick up some of that gross profit is going to continue to increase. But the bottom of this slide shows the operating expenses. So we did a straight 8.5%, just as an example. We don't think that's the best way to look at it, and we'll get into that. But on this example, if you have 8.5% inflation, 7 cents a gallon per year increase in margin, you're not going to get back to where you were in 2020. And we just want to let people know that you need to be a little bit more analytical of what's happening out there and what you need to do to get your business kind of back in shape. So the second sample we did, same gallons, and we did one at 10 cents, at 10 cents a gallon increase per year. That's 40 cents in 4 years on propane, 6 cents on heating oil. That's 24 cents. I think back to 15 years ago when margins on heating oil were 40 cents and on propane was 70 cents, and that was kind of the norm. Then it became 50, then it became 60. Now we're talking margins of $1.20 to $1.50 a gallon on propane. Propane, it depends on your product mix, but this is just an average. And on the heating oil, I mean, we're talking about $1 a gallon. Now we see $1 a gallon in certain markets, but certainly not industry wide. So we did this as a second sample, and with these substantial increases, we ended up. And Marty, next slide. We ended up again looking at the bottom line profit. Okay, now it's going to take a couple of years to get there. It'll somewhere around 2024 with now also we use various inflation rates, which we're going to talk about on the operating expenses. So the things are, you got to look at EBITDA, which is a measure for value of a business, and then you have times a multiple, which is based on various value drivers, whether it's automatic delivery, tank control, different demographics. We're not going to get into the valuation process that much, but EBITDA is the earnings piece that this is really affecting here. The multiples is a different story. So what we want to show here is ways you can take a look at your business and get yourself back on track here. I paid $17 for a hamburger the other day at a restaurant that I was paying $9 or $10 not too long ago. So we've seen inflation. So don't think that your customers, they see it at the gas pumps. You're going to have to raise the prices are already up there. You got to raise your margin. It's a matter of managing that with competition. That's the trick, and it's always been the trick to do it. So if you have a good value proposition, we think you can raise your margins. So we're gonna, at the end here, we're gonna get into what you need to do today if you want to get back to where you were in 2020. We'll go to the next slide, Marty.
Yeah, and before we do that,
Yep.
I just want to comment that by looking at this visual, it's clear that even with an increase in margins at steady 8% inflation, you are not going to be back to your EBITDA levels, as Steve alluded to, for 4 years, which, as we'll continue to show in our future exhibits, the impact that's going to have on the value and the cash flow. So the most recurring theme that we're going to have today is don't do nothing. Something has to be done to combat this. If you sit there and try to operate the business the same way it's operated for the past 2 to 3 years when things were going really well, more than likely you're going to be disappointed, because, as Steve alluded to, if a burger has doubled in price, think about how much it's cost for your employees to keep them, and understanding the supply shortage that you have there. Think about the cost of steel and the cost of capital, which we'll get into, and that impact. So if you don't want to wait 4 years to retain your current EBITDA levels, you have to do something.
Thanks, Marty.
So what I did here was I took the numbers that Steve used in his prior exhibits with the adjusted EBITDA levels going back from 2020. I did 5 years and weighted the cash flows. And in this environment, what you see here is I tweaked it. So I assumed that your operating expenses as your percentage of your gross profit would actually stay in line year over year, so that, you know, whatever increases you're having on your OpEx, you're making up for it in your margin. And as you can see through that exhibit, you still take a dip in your EBITDA levels, but it steadily has increased back up at 2024. But again, still not where it was at 2020. However, under this model of a normal environment, so to speak, where there's no inflation, assuming that your weighted cash flows over a 5-year period is about 1.9 million, and you have an annual CapEx spend of 300,000, your free cash flow ends up being about $1.6 million. And under this guise, that would give a calculated, not open market, calculated value of $10.7 million and an EBITDA multiple of 6.5. We kind of assumed in this situation that this is a primarily propane-based company, maybe a little bit of oil. And so I wouldn't get as focused on the multiple, but what I want to show you is if everything here is constant, and now we have 8% inflation. So now this is really going back to the numbers Steve showed before. If you were to do nothing, your EBITDA levels will continue to drop from 2020, but they will not nearly catch up as quickly by 2024, and you still won't be back to 2020 levels. And to compound that, your ongoing capital expenditures are going to go up because of inflation. Now, I assumed an 8% increase in ongoing CapEx. I'm not blind to the fact that the cost of steel has gone up like 80%. So if anything, this exercise is very conservative. But what I want you to see is if everything else is the same, but you're not catching up with the inflation of your operating expenses, the value of your company went from 10.7 million to 9.7 million. So you just lost $1 million of value by doing nothing to combat the profitability loss from the operating expenses. And I really think that's an important thing to see. The multiple is still the same, but your free cash flows go down around $150,000, which can yield almost $1 million in overall value of your business. So the other point I want to make, and we'll get into it later, is at some point, and it's already started, the cost of borrowing has gone up. And when the cost of borrowing has gone up, that could have an impact on the values of companies. And that EBITDA multiple, that could be a 6.5 now. You know, if you were to lose a half a point to a point just because the cost of borrowing is higher and buyers are concerned about their ROI, in this example, a half a point off the multiple is another $1 million of value. Take a full point, that's $2 million of value without having done anything. So not to beat a dead horse, but this is kind of why Steve and I are very adamant that it's important that action is taken and not running status quo. So go to the next slide here.
Thanks, Marty. And we did have a question if the slides and the presentation will be available afterwards. And I answered yes, it'll be available.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure what format, but if you want to contact us directly, we'll be glad to get you a copy as well. So what I did here, rather than do a straight 8.5% inflation factor, I think this is where you can really understand your business a little better and what's happening in your business a little better. So I just want to walk through this. I separated the wages because they're usually the largest expense item you're dealing with. Even the officer, even the owners, if they're used to, in this example, $200,000 a year, they're going to need to take home more money to buy that $17 hamburger. So we put in a 5% increase. Everybody knows what's happening with the labor market, with service and delivery, and it's not a matter of bringing in a new driver if you can find one at $3 an hour over what you wanted to pay. It's that you have to pay everybody $3 an hour more because you may lose them. So the wages, we've seen at least 10% increase the last 2 years in driver wages and service wages. So while inflation rate is 8.5%, conservatively, we put 10% wage increase, both delivery and service. Now, on the delivery, we do it per gallon, but since the gallons are steady here, it's the same 10% increase, but I recommend you do it by gallon. Office and other, again, to keep your people whole. It's even hard to find office people lately. We did it at 6%. So this is where we're tweaking from that 8.5 to what's realistic out in the market. As we move down, and the second section here in blue, these are revenue related operating expenses. They don't have anything to do with gallons, or I should say they do indirectly, but it's revenue. Bad debt, which we've seen range from 0.1 to 0.5 or 0.6. And bad debt is something you have to be really careful of when oil is $4 or $5 a gallon, because we think that the spike could actually be even higher if people can't pay. Luckily, we have full employment, so it's not like there's an employment situation that might lead to bad debt. But I think Marty's going to expand on that. Credit card fees is another thing, and again, we may see more people using credit cards at these prices. This is 0.7% of total revenue. It doesn't mean that's your rate. This is if you are, we've had companies that are almost 100% credit card payment, which is great for cash flow, which helps right now. But then the rate will be that much higher. But you can see in here, you're going from 61,000 in 2020 to 115,000, almost a doubling in credit card processing fees. So keep an eye on that. Would also encourage you to shop it, particularly with some of the industry companies out there that can really save you some money here. Vehicle fuel, we used the price of heating oil in here, and in this particular example, it was 40,000 gallons a year. But you can see it doubled just in the last year. Everybody knows that, but are you putting that in your projections to understand how much margin you need to get to get back to where you are? And then we have this list on the side. If you on the operating expenses, advertising, maybe you can cut a little bit there, but you probably still have some increases. You got to be careful. If you cut too much, you may not have the business. You may lose some accounts or whatever. So, look at all these items. Postage we've seen gone down historically over the last few years. There's a downward trend due to electronic payments, electronic billing. We encourage you to continue to do that. It's not a big number on the sheet, but every dollar counts right now. Things like dues and subscriptions, again, they'll more than likely go up. We know you need them, but go through, I won't go through every line item. Rent is one that I do want to talk about. If you own the real estate most companies own it under a different company if they own it, but, take a look at that. Tax wise, where do you need to be there? What are your expenses on the real estate portion of your business, which might be on a separate P&L? Try to cut back where you can. Maybe you don't have to make certain repairs to your building, but supplies expense. Telephones is an area we've also seen fairly flat lately. Travel and entertainment, we've seen gone the other way. If airline ticket costs going up, hotel rooms going up, rental cars going up if you can find one. So take a look at each line item on your P&L and make a projection based on where you think it's going to be. And the small dollars really add up. In this example, on the very bottom line, we have the total operating expense, then what the increase is from year to year. So we have seen a pop in 2022, but if you can cut that 8.5% down to, in this case, 6.1, 6.2%, it's going to have a positive impact on your bottom line. So managing expenses is very important right now.
And Steve, just on top of all that, there's some companies that I see that will include freight and transport in their OpEx, others put it in their cost of sales. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, we've just been having this discussion. We hired a new person, Tamara Kovacs, from Propane Resource. She's been doing this a long time, and she always had freight as cost of goods sold. We kind of leave it wherever. Sometimes it's in cost of goods sold, sometimes it's in operating expenses, depending on how our client has it. But that's a really good point, Marty, because we've seen, first off, they've got drivers too. They've got truck repairs. And if you look at repair and maintenance vehicles on here, I have it at 10% because it's been higher. And then they have a fuel surcharge. So we've seen, 25 to 40% increases in transportation. So that's another item. If you deal with it in cost of goods sold, then maybe your cost of goods sold number needs to go up, or you need to have margin to offset it. If you have it as a line item operating expense, be very cautious of that fuel surcharge.
Yeah, and I think as I listen to you and really look at the top part with the payroll, and then the line items in blue with the bad debt and credit card and the vehicle fuel and then transport, you put those all together, and that's a massive increase to your cost per delivery. And I know that it's easy for us, Steve and I, to sit here and say, raise your margin, raise your margin. Obviously, we have, we're in our glass house when we say that, and we know that's easier said than done. But if your cost per delivery has gone up and you can't offset that with additional revenue sources, then the only other way you can make it up is to reduce some of the operating expenses we had below. I've had a lot of clients ask me lately about the ability to take the credit card fees, which have continually shot up, and see if they can pass those on to the customer as a credit card charge or something of the like. I will tell you that is very state dependent. In Massachusetts, it's actually against the law to pass on a credit card fee. Now, companies do it, and I don't know how they get away with it, but I can't advise a client to do something like that, where they're putting a line item on the bill for the credit card charge. If you have other ways to pass on fees to the customer, I think, there was the concept of delivery fees that a lot of people have been implementing, depending on whether it's legal in your state, but alternative sources of additional revenues will offset that, whether if you don't have service contracts, getting service contracts, any other way to increase your gross profit, because if you can't increase the gross profit, your only other option is to decrease your operating expenses. I think it's one-on-one there. As I looked through some of the other line items Steve talked about, with advertising, I do strongly believe you need to continue to invest in your online presence, in your website, and your social media. But if you're doing things like paper flyers, paper mailings, radio ads, commercials, I do believe this is probably an opportune time to consider cutting back on some of that. I mean, at the end of the day, we all kind of know that the best way, not the best way, the most effective way of bringing new customers is through acquisition. I'm just not convinced in this day and age that paper mailings are going to lead to a lot of new customers, unless obviously you're price gouging. So that's one place to look at. On the vehicle side, there's really nothing you can do about the fuel other than investing in software that can optimize your delivery routing so that you're making less deliveries and putting less miles on your trucks. But I'd also, if you haven't already done a numbering system, meaning everyone numbers their trucks. Everyone's got T51, T50, whatever. But at this point, you should be able to have an automatic report generated for you every year that tells you how much expense or upkeep you're spending on each truck, because that's your catalyst to determine if it's time to scrap the truck. At the end of the day, we still have tax advantageous rules in the tax code to take accelerated depreciation on the purchase of vehicles, which would reduce your taxable income, which would increase cash in your pocket. And that is a much more efficient way of going about it than throwing all this money at a truck that you're just trying to salvage. Another thing you could think about too on the vehicle side, if you're able to find or hire a good mechanic, those are hard to find these days, but if you can bring one in-house and they can do a lot of that work internally, we've seen the ROI and the reduction of repairs and maintenance expenses significantly decreased as a result. Going down here too, I know Steve touched on postage and office expense. So on this example, the postage is low and I fully agree with it. But if I've looked at other companies where they're spending upwards of $30,000 a year on postage. And I guess to that point, I say, if you're not paperless at this point, it's really time to invest in that model. If you can just consider the savings that you'll have on office supplies, paper, postage, copy machine rental costs, or buying a new copy machine, things that have really become antiquated, you will save a lot of unnecessary money doing those things. We've done a lot of that. I also seen one of the biggest expense items on some companies being telephone, which always fascinates me because sometimes I can't decipher whether it's everyone's got a cell phone in the company or if it's the landline plan. I'll tell you, at Gray Gray, we completely wiped out our entire phone system, and our entire phone system is now operated through Microsoft Teams. So, which I believe the only thing we have to pay for is the cost of Microsoft Office, and it's led to significant savings. You can do, I don't even remember what it's like to have to pick up a phone anymore because it all comes through my computer, and it actually makes you more efficient at the end of the day too, because you can be talking and typing at the same time and not have your ear to your shoulder like you used to. I know some people had headphones. I wasn't as fortunate to get those, but consider putting your telephone system on the cloud like that, and you could see instant savings. When I look at a line item, like, okay, Steve, will you say something?
No, that good
Yeah.
points.
Yeah, and when I look at something like rent, like I understand that many of you listening in probably own the real estate that you're operating on. And so that rent expense line item is really just another payment to you. There's nothing, if you adjust it, it's 6 and 1/2 dozen in the other. But if you're one that's renting from third-party rent, I guess I encourage you to maybe consider other ways to optimize the space you're in. Maybe ask yourself, do you have more space than you need? And if there's any repurposing that can be done, if you have an opportunity to maybe sublease some space as an additional income pickup and offset of rent, I recommend considering that. If you have, employees in your front office that you think could work efficiently in a remote environment and save yourself some of the rent, it's just, again, it's little things that seem obvious, but are all opportunities to help reduce this operating carry that is definitely going to go up in the next couple of years. And it's obviously really scary. We did talk a little bit about the transport and inflation there. If you have the capital, and maybe now's a good time to consider investing in your own transport and not relying on third parties. If you have the capital to invest in the trucks and build out that infrastructure, it's not like starting from scratch, like a whole new line of propane, so to speak. But if you can control the transport and the flow and your people, then you might be able to pick up some profitability that way. But ultimately, I do think this is a time where you need to look at your whole enterprise, especially if you're a well-diversified company and you're doing more than just oil and propane and service, and shift your focus on the higher margin areas. Maybe it's placing an emphasis on your oil customers to convert them to propane if you're doing both. Maybe it's trying to pump out as many installations as you can. Maybe it has nothing to do with a heating product line that you have, but the key, like I said, is you want to try to increase your gross profit. It's better to increase your gross profit than it is to try to cut costs and save on your operating expenses. It's obviously still an option on the latter, but I think Steve and I are both in agreement that it's much better for you to do more things to increase the gross margin. And cutting back on costs has an impact on morale, on employees. They start to see these things. They start to get a little nervous, and in an environment where the labor supply is so short, everybody counts, and it's not always been that way. At Gray, we feel in the same pains that a lot of you business owners are feeling with the employee shortage and having to, it's the equivalent of you guys having to go out on the truck for the first time. I'm out doing staff level grunt work that I was doing when I was 22. So it's hopefully it's temporary, but right now it's our reality and we need to adapt to it.
Marty, I just want to expand on one item. We were doing a business valuation, and I saw an other revenue item that jumped off the page at me. It was substantial, and so I asked the owner, "Where's the offset? Where's the cost of goods? Where's the expense associated?" And he said, "No, it's delivery fees. There is no offset expense to it." And his EBITDA just popped right up. You can't do it in every state. And I asked him about his feedback. 4,000 customers. He had 2 that complained, and he handled them individually. He also used a professional marketing company from this industry to implement that plan. And I think that's why you didn't get a lot of pushback. So I would encourage you to take a look at it. It seems to be received well by customers. And they, I know people sell against it. They say, oh, they have a delivery fee. We don't. Go with us. We haven't seen an impact of that. So we would encourage you to at least explore that option.
Yep, absolutely. And I didn't mention this in the beginning, and I should. If questions come up that you have during the presentation, you can just send them directly to me in the chat box, and I'll address them as soon as I see them.
Okay. So this is, I wanted to give one more model here. This is to say, hey, we're going to pass this on to our employees. I use that balance approach on the expense that we had from the last slide. And then I said, okay, where do you need to be to get back to your 2,160,000 in this example? And, again, a lot of companies actually took care of it in 2021. But if you didn't, this is where they need to be. They need to go up 18 cents a gallon on propane. You notice the 18.55. I got very exact on this particular slide, so I could get them all at 21.60. And then you're still going to have inflationary pressure. This does have an annual inflation. Hopefully, inflation's going to not rear its ugly head and kind of become less. But you're going to be 5-6 cent a gallon increases in the future if inflation stays where it is. And I did the same on the heating oil. Now you could play with one or the other. Obviously not everybody has 2 million gallons of both. But I just wanted to show you to address this. You got to put it in margin. You got to watch out for your competitors, particularly if you have a lot of will call business, because you don't know if people are calling you and a competitor. Are they buying from you, or are they going to buy from the competitor? There's ways to track that, but it's a little more complex. It's for another webinar. But this is what it would take under those expense scenarios to keep your business whole. I just wanted to point that out. And
we did get a couple of questions, Steve. Should we take them now, or do you want to wait till the end? I have no problem.
Yeah, wanted to. I think we only got a couple slides left, right?
Yeah. So why don't we get through it and then we'll address them. I think they're good. They're really good questions too.
Okay, good.
So this is just kind of a timeout and a recap here. So we've talked about the increased cost of capital and how you need to be able to absorb those increased costs, not only from a cash flow outflow standpoint for what you're buying, but to make sure you're passing that increased cost on to your customer, because if they're not going to eat it, you are. And so you need to do that as owners of companies. You're the last one to get paid. So the last dollar falls to you. I'll show you an example in the next slide that will really maybe hit home on that. Obviously, in an inflationary environment, that's the biggest challenge, is the inability to pass on cost to customers. You really need to have a good communication approach to that. It's every company's dealing with it. You as owners are also same time consumers, and you're purchasing from people that are passing their increased costs on to you, and they're probably saying the same thing of, hey, it's inflation, and I got to pay my people more, so I got to charge you more. It's the same exact thing for you. So you can't be afraid to have that same mentality. It's kill or be killed in that situation. We've had to do it a lot, and yeah, I've had to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations, but at the end of the day, and I'm going to actually address one of the questions about how to deal with increasing margin when competition is not as all. The key is you got to be able to justify the increase. You can't just say, I'm doing it because I'm paying people more money, and so you have to deal with it. You got to back it up with good service. You got to show the value that you are, and hopefully you're one that has a customer list that is not always price shopping around. It's very sticky. You get a lot of full service automatics, service contracts, and everything. But at the end of the day, if nobody else around you is increasing and you need to increase, the best thing you can do is back it up with good service, and that may be more touch points, more communication with the customer. You might have to work harder to justify the margin, but that's the only way that I could see doing it without just doing it and turning a blind eye. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Steve.
Yeah, that's one of the questions we had is, how do you handle customer issues when we've increased our margin? since February, but competition's not following suit. That's I know we said we wait to the end, Marty, but I saw that question pop up,
Mhm.
and I think it's a good one. It's always difficult to do that, and again, the value proposition is the best way to do that. I would caution people. You have 2,000 customers and you get 3 complaints. That is a vast minority of your business. So, you have to handle it that way. Hopefully, you're getting calls from other people. It's difficult, but you know where you need to be to run your business. We've always had this. You've always had low price competitors. If the lowest price always got the deal, then you wouldn't sell any gallons. It's not how it works. You've built long-standing reputations in your business. The thing is to kind of keep track of it, to see how many complaints you are getting. Maybe track them, write them down, or if you have a CRM system, keep track of it. And if it becomes an issue, then maybe you want to look at it, and maybe you want to temporarily, bring your prices down. Bringing your prices down in July is very different than bringing your prices down in February, because you're doing so much less volume.
Mhm.
But you've dealt with this as long as you've been in business, so it's letting people know why you're worth it.
And I'm really glad you said that, Steve, because you triggered my favorite line that I've probably said in every presentation I've ever done is, if your customers aren't calling you complaining about prices, then you're clearly not charging enough. You want to have small subset of your customers complaining. That's how you know that you're maxing out your profitability, because otherwise, if no one's complaining, you're probably leaving money on the table.
Yeah. We've actually done that with some companies where I remember when oil went up, it was like two, I had a client, it was at $2.99 and they were at like a 75-cent margin. Then it went up so much that now they're at a 65-cent or 68-cent margin or something. And I said, well, why are you still at $2.99? They're like, well, we can't go over $3. We'll be way too expensive. And I said, well, why don't you try it and track your complaints? So they said, okay, we'll go to 302. I said, no, go to 309, and see. And they tracked their complaints. They did not have one complaint out of almost 3,000 customers when they went up. And that kind of, gave them the information they needed to continue to have the margin offset, the cost of fuel.
Right. All right. So I think that's a really important point to bring home there. We've already talked about the payroll increases. I talked about whether you really need that new truck. And the question is, if you're spending too much money on your current trucks, maybe you do need that new truck. And like I said, take advantage of the tax rules. We talked about, Steve mentioned the increase in transport, and we talked about the thought of bringing it in-house. Line of credit usage, it's really more of a cash flow tool that we talked about in the price spike. But at this point, with everything going on in the price spike and inflation, your cash flow situation is not going to be as positive as it once was. And so if you haven't already, you really should be talking to your lender about getting a temporary or permanent increase in your line of credit. I alluded to the increase in interest rates. I read an article the other day that I'm sure many of you have seen at this point, that the mortgage applications are at a 5-year low. So the slow and subtle increase in interest rates which is a direct effect of inflation, is really starting to creep up, and that's going to affect refinancing. So if you're someone who's looking at doing a refinancing or coming close to it, I recommend you accelerate that process before the rates get too high. I've seen some term sheets. I had term sheets back in December, January offering, fixed rates at 3% even. I have one 3.5%. And now when I'm seeing them, it's closer to like 5%. And as that has an impact on banking, it's going to have an effect on transactions. I think Steve can touch on it right now. I don't think you're seeing much right now, Steve, but that inflection point is down the road, right?
Yeah, I thought the increase in the cost of capital was going to negatively affect values. Matter of fact, there's an article, I think it comes out this month, that I wrote in BPN magazine. To give an example, I mean, a company with $1 million EBITDA that was spending, $200,000 a year in CapEx, buying a new truck, putting out some propane tanks, whatever it was. That same company making the same $1 million is now putting out over $300,000 a year in CapEx, because the trucks are up 40%, the tanks are up 80%, certain sizes. So, you're looking at a big outlay. So what does the owner get to keep? What's the free cash flow or the distributable cash flow? And it's gone from, in that example, from 800,000 to 700,000. So we would think as valuators that that's going to negatively affect the value of the business. And we had a lot of people say, yeah, but my propane tanks are worth so much more money. Isn't my company worth more money? Well, does someone want to invest the same amount of money and make less? So, we thought it would go down, but it hasn't. We've actually seen the opposite, which is, again, these things are a little, sometimes it's what the market will bear. Part of it we think is because the interest rates are so low, because there's so much cash in the market. Accelerated depreciation is just throwing a lot of cash into the market. What do you do with this cash? The interest rates, if the interest rates get high enough, now you know what to do with the cash. You can invest it and get a decent return with no risk or limited risk. But people are very willing to put it back into acquisitions, readily put it back into the business, which is great for our clients, great for the industry in general. Just a little bit unusual. It's not what we expected.
Absolutely. And I put a line item at the bottom about distributions and cash out of the corp. If you're highly leveraged or moderately leveraged and you're starting to run into these issues, you're going to start to hear a little bit more from your bank about being able to take cash out of the company. I have a lot of companies on covenants where they can only take a distribution out of the company if it's to cover their taxes. I do think banks are going to be hitting home a lot harder. I'm already having a lot of conversations with a lot of lenders with energy clients, and covenants are getting real tight and there's a lot of concern. One thing I didn't really talk about on the operating expense slide, which I meant to, was on the bad debt expense. I've had a lot of conversations with the increase in prices about increasing your allowance for bad debt so that you can kind of take advantage, not take advantage, but we got a price spike right now. When there's a price spike, customers are not only slow to pay, some don't pay at all. And if you're one with a demographic customer base that's in a low income area, you're going to get hit a lot harder than that annual 0.35% as a percentage of revenue. Despite the revenue increase, it's going to be even more. So make sure you have that reserve in place because it's meant to help you in that rainy day when you do have to write it off. You'd rather know about it now than wait until you finish reporting on the year and have to take a huge write-off at the end of the year. I mean, obviously, if your banks are looking at your financial information quarterly, they want to know ahead of time too what's good AR, what's bad AR, because a lot of times they're lending against AR, and so they want to know what they're working with. So this next slide, this is really just me trying to give you guys a visual of what it looks like to do nothing. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a big proponent of doing budgeting and break-even analysis before the year starts to kind of map out how much you want to make in your company. So I just took very rounded numbers here. Here's a company that has $1.5 million of overhead expenses, picks up another 25,000 of, call it finance charge income, and then has a service department that generates around 300,000 in gross profit, which would give a net overhead of $1.1 million. And let's just say the owner's salary, which is again 200,000 before bonuses and distributions, your total burden is 975 because the owner's salary shouldn't be a part of the burden. As I mentioned earlier, as an owner, you're the last one to get paid. So if there's nothing left for you, there's nothing left for you. But in this case, the company has 975,000 of burden. They do 2 million a gallon. They sell 2 million gallons a year. So if they were able to continue to sell 2 million gallons a year, they need to make a 49-cent margin on every gallon they sell to break even. And under that same guise with the burden above, if your current margin is around $1.20, then conversely, you would need to sell 812,000 gallons to break even. So either you sell your 2 million at 49 cents, or you sell your $1.20 margin at 800,000 gallons. That's how you break even. If you were to do absolutely nothing and you just incurred this 8% increase in inflation and everything else remained constant, so I assumed your overhead expenses go up by 8%, your gain and loss from service remains the same, although if I'm really taking this all the way down to the most granular level, if you're not adapting, your gain and loss from service would probably go down too because you'd have increased labor costs and flat revenues. But let's just stick with the example. Same owner salary, so your burden goes up $120,000 by doing nothing, just inflation. Now you have to sell, in order to break even at your 2 million gallon level, you need to make 55 cents. So you need to make another 6 cents for every gallon just to break even. So that just means you're clawing harder and harder to turn that profit. Because of that same example, you're still doing $1.20 margins, which is great, and you have that burden, you now need to sell 100,000 more gallons per year to break even. So under the normal environment, that 813,000th gallon was profit. Now it's no longer profit. That's still clawing back your original cost. So 6 cents more to break even, sell 100,000 gallons more to break even if you're to do nothing and just absorb the impact of inflation in the most conservative of ways. I would argue it's probably a bigger delta if we really dug in on the gain or loss from service part too. But I just thought this was kind of a visual way of saying, like, got to do something. Got to do something. All right. And by the way, we are winding down here. We got about 12 minutes to the hour, and I think we're doing great on time. These are just cash flow tips. I actually kind of stole it from my other presentation, so I'm not going to spend more than a minute on it, but it's maximizing your receivables, incentivizing credit card payments, negotiating with customers, payables, stretch your payables, but stay within the confines. Don't get late payments, don't become delinquent. You know, inventory, we always talk about managing your parts. A lot of companies just expense parts through either cost of sales, or sometimes they end up in a parts expense and OpEx. Those are all subject to inflation. So now is the biggest reason to be doing physicals of your inventory, knowing what your parts are, not having a situation where you go out and buy a part that's already sitting in someone's van or sitting in the warehouse. I cannot tell you how much sunk capital is caused as a result of poor parts inventory management. Line of credit, we talked about, you know, making sure that you are having conversations with your lenders. A lot of lenders out there understand the industry. A lot of lenders out there don't understand the industry. If you have a lender that's looking at your financials this year and they start talking about your gross profit percentage and why it's down, you're not with the right lender. They don't understand your business because they're just looking at the increased revenues and the increased costs. You know, $2 million of gross profit on $5 million of revenue is the same thing for you as the owner as $2 million on $10 million of revenue. But if the bank's looking at it, they're going to say, well, your gross profit percentage cut in half. What happened there? And they don't understand. And so those are the types of banks that scare me, because they're the ones that will put you into forbearance or default without really knowing that your margin's still there. You're just dealing with the commodity. So
Well, I want to jump in a second. There's two items that I see on cash flow that you have to be very careful of, particularly this year. One is prepays. Prepays have been a way that people use to take money in to help them with cash flow. Usually you got to give a discount. So just be careful, because you're giving a discount. You're making less money on that client. So weigh what that discount is versus, you know, another source of working capital. And the other one is budgets. This is probably going to come up in the next month or two if it hasn't already. You know, you're going to be changing people's budget payments from $300 a month to $900 a month, or whatever the number is. So, you know, you're going to have to be a little cautious on how you handle that. I don't have an answer for you on that, but it's just something to be aware of. You may get some pushback when you put out your new budget numbers if you're basing it on these numbers. And be careful not to base it too low, because then you're going to be in a cash flow crunch. Right. So it's another one of those fun challenges us marketers or the marketers get to take a look at.
Yeah, and I kind of laugh at myself when I'm saying on one breath, like, increase your gross profit, and in the same breath I'm saying special discounts, right? Because every discount you give is more money out the door. But at the end of the day too, the sales don't mean anything if the cash hasn't come in from those sales. So whatever you got to do to get the cash in, get the cash in.
Yeah, agreed. Credit cards, everyone used to be, you know, oh, I don't want to do credit cards when they were charging you 2% and 3%. I got that. But now that credit card fees have become much more reasonable, although we have seen an increase recently in those fees, it's something you want to shop. Insurance, we didn't talk about that specifically, but we see a big dip in insurance on operating expenses. What happened there? Oh, we changed companies. And then you slowly see it go back up, but you got to shop those big ticket items. This is the time to do that. So.
All right, well, home stretch here. So just, again, rehashing the key takeaways, do everything you can to increase your margin. Again, we all know, easier said than done. Look at your operating expenses and evaluate where savings or optimization can be achieved. Look for additional revenue streams. Shift your margin focus to higher margin areas. manage your cash flow, and don't do nothing. If you can do 1 out of the 6, you're already in a good place. So want to make sure that we just got that point across and hopefully gave you some ideas along the way of what you can do. And obviously, you know, Steve and I are here. We understand the business. We're advisors to you. We're partners to you. So don't be afraid to call us and ask us. We're happy to walk through any of the challenges and tell you what we think we can do to help, you know, keep that level of value and profitability that you're accustomed and used to. This is a small plug too. So if anyone's listening in that's going to be down in Nashville next week, Steve and I will be there. We're doing a couple presentations. And if you want to follow up with us on this presentation and ask us any questions, please feel free to find us. Do have a few questions here, Steve.
Yeah, and I've gotten a couple to me sent just to me also.
All right.
You want me to grab one that came in? I thought it was pretty good.
Go ahead.
I have a question on inventory management. I'll read the question. I assume that if you have fuel storage, not to fill it up, but rather draw it down, then buy from the rack for just what you need, especially as the market is now in backwardation. Yeah, I mean, when the market's in a carry, meaning that you can buy it cheaper, you know, today than in the future. That actually, I haven't looked at the market recently. I would have thought it might have been in a carry, but if the market is, if you can buy fuel cheaper today than it is a couple of months from now, and you have the storage capacity to do that, that's not a bad idea. But you gotta, whatever you buy, you gotta sell. You sell it in the future and you make that spread. Now there's some carrying costs, there's cost to keeping that fuel in the tank. Highly recommend you work with one of the industry hedging specialists if you're going to do anything like that. I mean, yeah, if the market's going to go up, then you should put more fuel in the tank. If the market's going to go down, then you want to keep your inventories low, but who knows what the market's going to do. So there's ways you can hedge those price fluctuations and take advantage of it. But, you know, I know a little bit about it, but the experts know a lot, and they more than pay for themselves by engaging them, would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay in my lane on this one. I mean, I was telling clients when the price of oil was down to like 50, 60 cents to stock up as much as you can, because I couldn't see it getting any lower. I'm not comfortable making that comment right now. Well, the prices have maybe turned into a more positive direction. It's still pretty high relative to what we've been used to. And I don't know if we're going to see a huge dip. I mean, we don't know when this war is going to end. We don't know when it's going to, you know, we got a lot of things going on domestically with our supply and production ramping up, and it hasn't reached its full potential based on what our president has allowed us to reopen on what he closed. But I think once that becomes a little more operational, that'll continue to have a good positive impact on price. But I do think patience is probably the best, but I'm not an expert at reading the markets the way the hedging folks are. So I won't say much more than what I just said.
Yeah. And it's not even reading whether it goes up or down. You just want to be hedged. Don't gamble. Don't speculate. That's when we see people bet the wrong way. And I've seen people lose their companies. So, you know, just make sure you're being safe in what you do. Don't try to guess the market.
Yeah. Well, I got a good question here. Do you have a rule of thumb for when a truck is costing too much? So I do have a rule of thumb, but I also believe there's an analysis that goes behind it. But I'll just say at a high level rule of thumb, if more than one consecutive year or more than once, in I would say 3 years, you're spending more than 15% of the cost of that truck to repair it, and it would really exceed what the depreciation would have been on a new one, you probably want a new truck, because A, the new truck will get you the tax benefit immediately that you can take all at once or subsidize over the 5 years. And 2, you're not going to have to pay the cost of upkeep on that. You know, when you're repairing a truck, you're keeping the truck there and you're saving yourself the huge outflow of having to buy a new truck, but you're just putting a Band-Aid on a problem that's going to keep going. And so I would say if 2 out of a 3-year span, you're spending more than 15% of the original cost of the truck to repair it, probably want a new one.
And I'll throw in a third on that is take a look at the gas mileage or the fuel efficiency of the new versus the old. If you can pick up, you know, if you can go from eight miles to the gallon to 9 or 10 miles to the gallon. That at these diesel fuel prices, that's another pickup.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know about you, Steve, but all I've seen lately is a lot of people entering the monitor space, the tech space within the industry. And I think this is a sign that these companies understand that there's a way to do these things optimally, not just think about the delivery to the customer and the customer experience, but keeping your vehicles used in the most efficient way, reducing the mileage and getting the most out of them. And if you haven't invested in some of these monitors or ways to efficiently navigate your routes, I think now's the time to do that as well.
Yeah, fortunately and unfortunately, we really have a great connection with our customers in this industry. I've actually heard several companies say, you know what, we're going out and doing 75-gallon deliveries because, you know, it's a $400, you know, bill that the customer gets as opposed to filling their tank up, you know, kind of hoping it'll come down. That's a really nice customer service thing to do. It also really hurts you on your delivery efficiencies. So that's another one of those balancing acts that people have. You know, you want to put in a 275 oil tank as an example, you know, you want to put 180, 190 gallons and then you're going to send a bill for $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 to a customer. And that's not a very friendly thing. So that's, again, you know, we're in a tough situation here and every market is going to handle that differently. It's just another one of those challenges that we have.
Yeah. I got one more question on my end. I'll just go through it. And I don't know. So the question is, are you expecting inflation to continue at this rate for over the next 3 years? I am not an economist. I am not a psychic. I will say that I'm a believer that a lot of what's happening right now has a lot to do with the political environment we're in. And I think when the next election is up, will be a bigger determinant as to whether this will continue or whether it will stop. I also think, I mean, I read, so I'm not saying I'm making this up, but we're obviously on the brink of another recession. And I think it's a matter of when that recession really hits, because when the recession hits, that could help reduce some of the inflation, even though the inflation is causing the recession. But it's all based on, it's a lagging indicator of what consumer behavior is going to be. So you're either going to have inflation stop over the next 3 years, or you're going to have a recession hit over the next 3 years. Neither one is good, but it's, I can't sit here and say, I don't know if inflation is going to be here for another 3 years. At 8% per year, I don't think it's reasonable. I can't see it being possible, but I also didn't see a $17 hamburger happening either. So who's to say?
I'm concerned about the core inflation. We all understand energy fluctuations, but that core inflation being, you know, over 6% is a little disturbing. Now the Fed's looking, you know, to raise interest rates to offset that, so that might help inflation, but now it's going to cause higher interest rates, which will negatively affect certain things, you know, like working capital and other things like that. So yeah, it's a balancing act. We don't really know, and we're kind of at world economy and or our government's management of you know, the federal systems. So it's a tough one to answer, but a good question.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's 12:01. I don't have. Do you have any other questions, Steve? I don't have any other questions.
Yeah, I do. Some of my competition drops their retail LP price in Q2, Q3. Are there any good arguments to follow suit? My logic is that's when we're light on cash flow. Why would we charge less? Yeah, this is, we used to do a seasonal margin calculator for clients. So if your goal, say on propane is $1.20 at the end of the year, and it depends on your market. With propane, if you own that tank, you control the customer, the tank control. But if you have certain parts of your business that are more will call or more price sensitive, then yeah, dropping that price in the months where you're doing very little volume. I've actually seen some companies go way down, like in September in the Northeast. in like September, beginning of October, like ridiculously low to try to capture that business for the winter coming up. And then they more than make it up, you know, when they get into wintertime margins. So it's a strategy people will use. You know, it's again, one of those things I'm not opposed to it. You got to compete against it sometimes, and it's difficult when you're 30 cents a gallon higher than someone else. So I would say take a look, and even like something I wanted to mention earlier was rather than wait for the end of the year when you're done with your taxes to find out how you did, and your accountant or Marty tells you how you did for the last year, you need to do this every month. You need to be looking at a monthly P&L. Where are my margins? How's my volumes compared to where I thought they would be? So particularly now with what's going on, you don't wait till the end of 2022 to see how you did. Get in there now and take a look at it. So, you know, take a look at what a seasonal margin calculator does to your business. It's very easy. Take a spreadsheet, how many gallons, what percentage of gallons you put each month, what your targeted margin is for each month, and then play with it. And if you're coming out to that, if 120 is your number and you're coming out to that 120 number, then you know you can go down a little bit in certain times of the year, but you got to make it up in the winter. So, okay.
That's it. I did get one other question, and I apologize because I don't think I can answer it right on the spot here, but the question was if I have a guideline for minimum gallons of bobtail should be delivering annually. Truthfully, I'd have to go back and look at some data. It's a very good question, and I think a lot of it could also be answered by looking at talking to someone from, I guess I would say Angus with their Abbate software, because they're the ones that really tell us what the most optimal drive is. But I have some information on gallons, and I can also look back at our survey data, and so I will get back to it. It's a good question, but I just don't have it on the spot. Apologize.
Marty, do we not have another question about the slide deck being available?
Yep. Yes. So we will make sure that if anybody wants a slide deck, we can. I'll talk to our market department, see if they're sending it automatically to the attendees. Otherwise, just reach out to us directly. And those who have messaged us individually, I already see you. I'll get you mine. Steve will get you ours. But happy to send that out. It's meant for you guys to have, not to us to keep. So, all right. Well, with that, 12:05. I think 5 minutes passed. Not bad, Steve. Awesome
Good
stuff.
question.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Good luck. We know it's not an easy time to manage your businesses. Just stay on top of it. It's a very unusual situation we're all in.
Yep. And just so you know, an e-blast will be sent out with the recording and the slide deck.
Okay.
So thank you guys on behalf of Steve and myself. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to listen to us. And like I said, we'll be in Nashville in a few days. Come find us. We'll be at the other shows coming up. Come find us. We're here for you guys. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you.